Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most influential thinkers, Aristotle. We're not just going to look at his ideas, but we're going to explore how his, scientific approach to politics literally created a blueprint for how we think about government, even today.
But let's start with a big question, one that really gets to the heart of his story. A lot of people have shaped political thought over the centuries, but who can we really call the father of political science? The real, nitty-gritty science of it all? The answer might not be who you think.
So for 2 decades, 20 years, Aristotle was the star pupil at Plato's famous academy in Athens. This guy was the best of the best, soaking up everything his legendary teacher had to say. But he wasn't just there to take notes.
See, Aristotle was nobody's copycat. His entire legacy, what we remember him for, was built on making a radical break from his master's ideas. It was this fundamental shift, a move away from the world of abstract, perfect ideals to the messy, complicated, and most importantly, observable world right in front of our faces.
Okay, let's really get into this, because this slide is the key to everything. On one hand, you have Plato, the idealist. He was totally focused on these perfect abstract forms, like the ideal version of a state that could only exist in your mind. But Aristotle? He was a hardcore realist. His whole approach was basically, hang on a second, let's look at what's actually happening in the world. He believed true knowledge comes from observation. And that one simple difference is why we call Plato the father of political philosophy, but Aristotle, he's the father of political science.
So, how did this epic showdown of ideas actually play out? Well, Aristotle started by systematically, piece by piece, taking apart his teacher's most famous theories, starting with Plato's vision for a perfect state.
First up on the chopping block, Plato's idea of a philosopher king. This was the concept of a single, all-wise ruler who would have absolute power. Aristotle looked at this and was, let's just say, deeply skeptical. To him, it was just way too risky. Putting that much power in the hands of one person, no matter how smart they are, was just asking for trouble. He argued that even the best human is still, human, driven by passions and self-interest.
And this quote right here, it just nails his counterargument. Aristotle was a huge champion for the rule of law. And why? Because a law is impartial. It doesn't have feelings. It's the result of collective wisdom, tested over time, not the whim of one person on one particular day. For Aristotle, the law is a much, much safer master than any single human could ever be.
He didn't stop there. Next, Aristotle went after Plato's really radical proposal that the ruling class should share everything, property and even families, all held in common. Aristotle argued this was just completely against human nature. He said, look, private property gives people a reason to work hard and take care of things. And getting rid of the family? He thought that was a terrible idea. That would weaken the very bonds of love and loyalty that actually hold a community together.
So, if you're going to tear down your teacher's vision of a perfect state, you'd better have something to offer in its place, right? After all that criticism, Aristotle had to present his own vision. If a state isn't some perfect utopia, then what is it even for?
This quote says it all. For Aristotle, the state isn't just about survival or making money. No, it exists for a much higher purpose, to help its citizens achieve a good life. And by that, he meant a life of virtue, of happiness, and of moral purpose. It's about creating the right environment for people to truly flourish.
Here's what's really fascinating. Aristotle didn't see the state as some artificial thing we just invented. He believed it was a natural development. It makes sense, right? We're social creatures. We naturally form families. Families group together to form villages. And villages eventually come together to form the state, or the polis. The state is simply the highest, most complete form of human community, the only one big enough and complex enough to provide everything needed for that good life.
So, this brings us from the big why of the state to the practical how. If the whole point is achieving the good life, how do you actually organize a government to make that happen? This is where Aristotle the scientist really comes out to play, shifting from pure philosophy to hands-on analysis. This guy didn't just sit in a chair and think. He went out and collected and studied 158 different constitutions from all over the Greek world. From all that data, he created this absolutely brilliant classification system. He sorted governments on 2 simple questions. Who rules? One person, a few people, or many people? And in whose interest do they rule? The pure forms are the good ones. They serve everybody. The corrupt forms only serve the people in charge. And Aristotle warned that these corrupt forms were doomed to fail because injustice is what sparks revolutions.
So, after all that work, what was his pick for the best government? Well, while a perfect monarchy might be great in theory, he knew finding that perfect monarch was basically impossible. So the best practical state, the one you could actually build and maintain, he called a polity. And this was his genius idea. A polity is a mix, a blend of ruled by the rich, oligarchy, and ruled by the poor, democracy. He believed that a big, strong middle class was the absolute key to a stable society, acting like a buffer between the extremes of wealth and poverty and preventing the kind of resentment that tears countries apart.
But creating this stable state brings up some really tough questions. Who gets to be a citizen? How are rewards and power shared fairly? And this is where we get into some of the most debated and, the most controversial parts of his entire philosophy.
So who actually gets to be a citizen and participate in this government? Well, for Aristotle, the answer was not very many people. In his view, a citizen was someone who had the time, education, and freedom from manual labor to actually participate in governing, which in his day automatically excluded women, laborers, foreigners, and, most importantly, slaves. And how does the state hand out rewards, like honor or political office? Aristotle's idea was called distributive justice. Now, this isn't about everyone getting an equal slice of the pie. It's about proportion. He argued that rewards should be given out based on a person's merit and their contribution to the overall good of the community. The more you contribute to the good life of the state, he said, the greater your share of the reward should be.
And now we have to face the most disturbing part of his philosophy, and there's just no way to soften it. Aristotle actually tried to justify slavery. He argued that some people were slaves by nature, that they had physical strength but lacked the full capacity for reason needed to guide their own lives. He saw this as a natural hierarchy, a necessary evil that allowed the household to function and freed up the citizen master to have the leisure time for politics. Now, obviously, this theory is morally indefensible, and it has been completely rejected and condemned throughout history. Critics correctly point out that it's based on a deeply flawed and dangerous idea of a natural hierarchy. It contradicts his other ideas about human reason, and worse, it provides a philosophical excuse for all kinds of brutal oppression. It's truly a dark stain on his otherwise incredible intellectual legacy. So where does that leave us? How do we balance this revolutionary political scientist with the man who was, in some ways, so bound by the prejudices of his time? Why, despite these massive flaws, is Aristotle's work still so fundamental to political thinking today?
In the end, his legacy is unshakable because he gave us a method. He was the very first person to treat politics like a science, something you could observe, classify, and analyze with actual evidence. His focus on constitutions, on the rule of law, and on the stabilizing power of the middle class has echoed down through the centuries, influencing everyone from the ancient Romans to the founders of America. He dragged politics down from the clouds of utopia and planted it firmly on the ground of reality.
And that leaves us right back where we started, with the essential question that defined the debate between him and his teacher, Plato. It's a question we are still grappling with in our own world today. Is it better to be governed by the best possible laws, or should we put our faith in finding the best possible people? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.